Today's Q&A is about coffee, and the question is very simple. Is all coffee kosher? Okay, well, coffee beans are inherently kosher, and it's assumed that the roasting and percolating of coffee does not create concerns of bishul akum. I mean, there were talks about it in the poskim earlier, but it's assumed that it's not. So that sounds like we're okay, and there should be no kashrus concerns. And in fact, in many cases, that's exactly correct. But I'm going to today mention just a couple of examples where it's not true. Okay, and the simplest is that if the coffee is flavored, that needs hashgacha, because the flavor is something added onto the coffee, and some of those might be not kosher. Now, related to that is that some companies have started fermenting their beans in ways to try to impart a flavor without adding a, so to speak, chemical flavor. Like some people do it in wine barrels or use other things like that. And if so, they would need hashgacha to make sure that they didn't, however that was done, did not cause kashrus concerns. Now, what's more rare, but worth mentioning anyhow, is that there are people who have figured out that they take coffee beans and they get digested by different animals, and it gives, then when the animal excretes those coffee beans, the coffee you can make from that has very unusual properties that I guess some people like. One of those is called black ivory coffee, which comes from elephants swallow it and comes out of their dung, and another one is called jacu, which comes from the droppings of a certain bird in Brazil, and certain other things like that are very expensive. And there's all kinds of halachic discussions if whether a person is or is not allowed to eat that, because it did go through the body, it was ingested and excreted by a non-kosher animal. Does that potentially affect its kasher status? Okay, now I'm going to keep on talking, drop more about coffee. I just want to pause for a second that I'm only talking about coffee. I'm not talking about other things that are like coffee, like beverages like chicory and things that make like from mushrooms that are supposed to be like coffee-like. We're just talking about coffee today. Now, okay, so assuming we got rid of these unusual flavored or beans that went through the animals, etc., how about just plain, simple, unflavored coffee without any of these problems? And the answer to that is, well, if you have unflavored coffee beans, whether they're whole or ground, regular or decaf, you could buy them at hashgacha. That's good news. Now, that's for coffee beans or ground coffee and things like that. What about instant coffee? Well, instant coffee is, what happens is the company roasts the beans and then they percolates them to make these huge vats full of liquid coffee. Okay, well, you want to buy powdered coffee. So what they have to do is they have to get the water out of the coffee, and then they can sell it to you in a powdered form. So there are two ways to do that to get the water out. One is called freeze drying, and that makes a very good quality coffee. And the other one is called spray drying, which is a different way of getting the water out of it. It works, but it's not as good as, it doesn't make the same quality of coffee as freeze dry does. Now, as a rule, anything that's freeze dried or spray dried needs hashgacha, because that same equipment could be used to get the water out of other things like non-kosher soup and things like that. But coffee companies usually have their own spray dryers and their own freeze dryers, and that's all they do. They just make coffee, so that's not considered a kashrus concern. Now, for Pesach, freeze dried coffee is also okay. Again, but if it's not flavored and it's not decaf, it's okay. But spray dried coffee needs hashgacha, because sometimes the starch is added to the spray dryer, to the liquid coffee before they put it into the spray dryer. Okay, now things that are a little more complicated. So far, we talked about buying coffee that you make for yourself. When you want to buy a hot cup of coffee at a restaurant or a convenience store or a coffee shop, then things get way more complicated. And the reason is because that all the equipment that they need to make that cup of coffee for you, that means a coffee machine and the carafe or anything else that's involved, has to be washed. Well, if they have to be washed, there are other things going on in that store that they're going to wash together with it. So they may be washing it together with non-kosher plates and dishes and things like that. Other things that are used are, whatever else that store sells. Now, whether that is or is not a halachic concern, the fact that they wash with other things, very much depends on the circumstances and of the specific store, and you need rabbinic guidance for that. On a case by case basis. Now, of course, and that's even that. I'm just buying a plain cup of coffee. Once you get into more fancy drinks like lattes and cappuccinos and other things like that, then those situations get even more complicated, and a person really needs direction on someone who knows the information to know what they can or cannot drink.